All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar about integrating narrative threat intelligence into the Security Operations Center. We've got a lot of great content here today with Wasim and Joe, but before we jump in, let me kind of give you a summary of what you're going to learn today and some of the takeaways. So what we'll be talking about today are narrative attacks against enterprises. They have increased significantly year over year. 35% is the number that we see from a lot of the analysts out there. They are now targeting executives, they are targeting brands, all types of industries, and they are manipulating perception and disrupting trust. And they're impacting operations all over the globe. So traditional security operations telemetry captures technical compromises, but misses the narrative layer, which is what we're going to talk about today. It's where modern attacks happen and where they begin. We're going to talk a little bit about this gray zone as well. Why is this important? Well, Gartner states that by 2028, enterprises will be spending upwards of $30 billion per year to combat this new threat vector called narrative attacks created by misinformation, disinformation. They're targeting every company, every organization, national security, executives, and they have in mind to do financial, reputational, operational, and even physical harm. So it's a big topic today. The World Economic Forum calls it the #1 global risk. And more security leaders, CISOs, are deciding and knowing that this is something that they have to own. And that's why this has become a critical priority for many organizations across the globe. So what we'll do today is we have two key speakers. We have Wasim Khaled, from CEO of Blackbird.AI, and we have Joe Cicero, Director of Strategic Alliances at SRA. They will be sharing their perspectives on this new threat vector and about the new partnership that they've announced just a few weeks ago. So we're really excited to have both of them on board to hear their responses, to hear their ideas, to hear the thoughts about how big of a threat this has become to corporations across the globe. So we're going to jump in here shortly, but before I do, I just want to make a quick note to the audience. This is an interactive session. We'd love to hear from you and your thoughts throughout the conversations. If you do have questions for Wasim or Joe, please drop them into the chat box. Members of our team will be present during the session and after the session, and we'll be happy to answer your questions in real time. So don't be shy, jump in the chat, share your perspective, and keep the conversations going. So let's get started. So welcome Wasim, welcome Joe. Thrilled to have you here today. This is going to be a great session, and let's dive right in. So with that, start with question number one. So Joe, I'm going to point this over to you. Tell us about SRA #1. And how did this relationship get started? As I heard, it was a chance meeting on an airplane on the way to Black Hat. So tell us more.
All right. First, Dan, thank you for having me here. Wasim, always good to partner with you and excited about the conversation today. I think before we talk about who SRA is, we have to talk about how Wasim and I know each other. And we have to rewind back to 2024 Black Hat flight from, I think it was JFK to Las Vegas. I'm sitting back in economy. My partner, now fiance, Ray, is sitting up in first class. She's trying to get all the Delta Sky miles so she can get her status renewed, etc. But she's lucky enough to be sitting next to Wasim. And, making pleasant conversation. So I'm told in the next thing that comes up in the conversation is a connection to Rochester, New York. I'm joining today from Rochester, New York, and Wasim, a University of Rochester graduate who's spent a lot of time in Rochester, and that was enough to get us into a fancy Black Hat dinner that Wasim and the team was hosting. But that was 2024, and we didn't announce our partnership, or we didn't make it Facebook official, as one would say, until Black Hat 2025. And I think it's because, friendships form fast, but partnerships take time. What makes sense? Are we meeting our client needs? Are we actually building something together that is better together? So who is SRA? SRA is an acronym, stands for Security Risk Advisors. We've been around for about 15 years, serving hundreds of clients around the planet. Our headquarters are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have a remote team, an office space in Kilkenny, Ireland, and Rochester, New York, where I'm joining from today right in our Rochester office. We are a Microsoft security partner offering everything from red teaming to blue teaming, with our signature service being Scalar XDR. That is our managed XDR service built completely on the Microsoft platform.
Excellent. Well, Joe, thank you for that. And it's a small world in cybersecurity, isn't it? So that's how a lot of those relationships come together. So Wasim, share your part of that story on the plane. I'd love to hear about that, and then share a little bit about Blackbird.AI.
Yeah, sure. Joe, great to be here with you today. And I have always believed that some of the most meaningful collaborations start through just pure serendipity, right? Those chance meetings that feel pretty random in the moment, but end up shaping something bigger down the line. And that's happened quite a bit at Blackbird, and this was one of those. So yeah, Ray and I both live in New York City now, but I have roots in Rochester, spent quite a bit of time there, UFR. But turns out she was in cybersecurity at Microsoft, and by the time we landed, it kind of went from casual chat to a pretty serious conversation about the landscape of cyber risk, and that I had to meet Joe from SRA because we have to continue this conversation. So yeah, we did this executive dinner, had him over. All of us kind of became pretty fast friends, and that evolved into this partnership between SRA and Blackbird. And like Joe said, like yeah, friendships happen fast, partnerships take a while to figure out how we're going to work together. But right off the bat, we thought we had something pretty interesting here. So a bit about Blackbird. So Blackbird is a company that provides narrative intelligence for Fortune 500, Global 2000 organizations, governments, national security. And what we do is we help them understand using a technology platform how narratives develop, how they expand, the inherent risk within those narratives. And those risks are something we coined called narrative attacks, which is a description of the tradecraft that drives risk for those organizations, financial, financial, reputational, and even executive people risk that could come out of concerted attacks around how people perceive what's happening in the world around them. So that's a high level, and looking forward to talking about this more today.
Great. All right. Thanks, Wasim. Appreciate it. And thanks, Joe, again. I love that story. And let's dive into more of the content here. So, Joe, I'm going to go to you to talk a little bit about how narrative attacks are impacting a lot of organizations. So this is more about client demand. So what are the challenges or incidents first revealed to SRA that clients needed visibility into these narrative attacks? And the need for narrative intelligence. Give us your view of that and what you're seeing out there.
Sure. So to start, we're the trusted advisor for a lot of the CISOs and the SOC teams that we're working with, whether you're a healthcare institution, a regional hospital, a large financial institution, large manufacturing. That's a huge range of clients that we support, but we call them clients and not customers because of that relationship we form and the trust that they put with us that we've built over the past 15 years. The big thing that comes from that trust is when new and emerging threats come into their environment, they come to us. Hey, have you seen this before? What are you doing about this? Do you have a service or any direction that you can point us in to help us understand, to prepare, to respond to what we're seeing in the larger ecosystem or what they're seeing in their very own backyard? And I think when we talk about problems that our CISOs, our SOCs are struggling to answer, that's where we start to talk about Blackbird's narrative threat intelligence. That is an area where they're looking at because, everyone understands digital threats as, maybe it's trolling and someone's saying something bad about your brand, and therefore it's more of a marketing problem or a PR problem. However, really what we're hearing is that trolling is becoming more and more organized, either through bot networks or large groups of people who are turning that into a cybersecurity attack. And, those are resulting in real threats, not just digital threats. Digital threats are bad. The threats of ransomware is very real. And we see a lot of our clients saying, hey, we hosted a fundraiser 3 years ago, and now we're worried that we're going to get ransomware today because of it. And And obviously, that's something that's very comfortable for us to understand in the cybersecurity world. There's digital threats, ransomware, and how do we respond to those things? That's not necessarily new, but what we're hearing more and more about is that these digital threats are becoming physical ones, right? Anger expressed online is becoming physical anger, and that is, challenging the workforce, the workplace. What's going to happen at my event? Who's going to show up? Are my employees okay? Is my executive leadership team okay? The more public your team is, the more meaningful your work is. It seems that is making you a larger target. What does that result in is just an overwhelming amount of noise coming into that security operations center to that CISO. And, they might not necessarily feel like it's their job to deal with that. They're inundated with so many other things. There's so many morale issues, stress, overwork, the crisis of things going on. And to now have to worry about this narrative threat intelligence can be very, very overwhelming. But at the end of the day, it needs to be like, whose responsibility is this? And, if you have like a large fusion center and you have a team dedicated to this, that's their responsibility. I have yet to see that. And we work with some large organizations, and even those that do have some of that fusion center set up, not, it's not as formalized as we see in the security operations center. So that's definitely something we're seeing. And just the fact of going back to noise, noise can be too much. It's like watching 10 TV channels at the same time. What do you do with it? It ends up just falling off the table, stuff you can't deal with. And again, this is where Blackbird comes in, because it's not just here's the narrative threat noise, here ingest everything, and here SOC teams go make sense of this, right? They're not necessarily skilled, and they don't have the capacity to do that. But with Blackbird, it's intelligent narrative threat signal, meaning that the Blackbird team obviously has some AI working in it, but also has a team of extremely talented and experienced analysts that are reviewing that threat signal before it goes to the client. So it's not necessarily overwhelming, and it's actionable, even if that action is to pass it off to another team.
That's great, Joe. I really like your comment or your point about watching 10 TVs at once, right? Information overload, too much noise. How do you get to the signal of what the real risks are and how to prioritize them? That's the important thing here. Really, really well said. So Wasim, over to you. This section's a little bit about AI and scale. So with the explosion of generative AI content and the ease of how it is to create harmful narratives these days, how is AI changing the scale and speed of narrative manipulation that security operations centers now need to protect against?
Yeah, well, certainly generative AI and also the vision models, video, audio, et cetera, has completely changed the game in terms of the level of threat and how it can scale. So what used to take coordinated teams, that's what we typically saw when we first entered this space, 5, 6 years ago. What used to take coordinated teams, a significant amount of manual work, now can have like one motivated individual with access to all of these kind of generative AI tools, and they can single-handedly create entire digital realities. Right? And we're talking about ecosystems of fake media outlets, artificial personas and experts in the online space, creating entire conversation threads that look authentic. And they can scale those instantly using a combination of these models and agent frameworks that can act as people, right? So again, where it used to be humans doing manual work, almost like a creative agency that's creating these attacks, you can now automate that and really scale it up fast. And we've seen cases where a single fabricated claim or even a recontextualized real world incident could then be scaled in the way that the actor wants it to be for the masses, right? How they want them to perceive that event. That can trigger market movement. It can drive nowadays policy response in hours or days. The barrier to entry for narrative attacks, for narrative manipulation has dropped to almost zero, but the impact has gone up exponentially. And so that's one of the reasons for us as a startup, distribution is key. And so my belief certainly in SRAs as well now, I think, is to expand the view of the SOC's uh, angle on threat intelligence. So it's not enough to watch network activity, intrusion detection, malware anymore. They have to watch narrative activity and narrative attacks because these narratives are often the opening move in a much larger volley for larger influence operations to drive some sort of outcome on the other end. And if you can detect them really early, or if you can see the patterns of movement within the information networks, you can get a sense of intent. You can determine which actors are the ones that are actively manipulating the conversation. You can see when they deploy bot networks versus just looking at like organic chatter. And then you can actually assess and predict how much damage things like deepfakes actually did in the wild versus just sitting in a folder as like it's a deepfake or not, right? And now with that information and with that enhanced context and resolution, you can disrupt the attack. You can run the right playbook before it ever actually touches your network, before it actually touches your brand or your stock price, or before it touches your people, your insiders who might be manipulated to become insider threats, or frankly drive a lone individual to drive threats against an executive, and they show up at your doorstep with a weapon, which is happening more and more frequently, which is one of the reasons a lot of organizations talk to us is early leading signals on physical risk.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. That's what we see the industry talk about. We see Gartner Forrester talk about it. We see it in the news, and all the use cases you just talked about. That's why a lot of CISOs and security operations threat researchers are coming to SRA, coming to Blackbird to ask questions about, we need to learn more about this. How do we protect against it? And we definitely see it becoming more and more of a priority. Where a couple years ago it might not have been that way, now it is. And that's a really interesting and a very quick change. So the
Yeah,
next,
and I'm sorry,
go ahead.
one thing I would just add to that is when we think about just scenarios, because I know the use cases really help with like what kind of risk there could be, false breach reports, deep fakes that are impersonating CEOs, saying things that could get everybody in geopolitical trouble, right?
Yep.
Orchestrated boycotts that are polarizing groups of people to mobilize in the real world. You could even throw out misleading narratives to throw off M&A deals, or supply chain incidents. And then those messages spread across digital ecosystems. And now the company's CEO, the shareholders, the partners, their customers, they don't know which one to believe. And you get inundated with all of this noise that prevents you from carrying out your mission, particularly the cyber and security teams. So again, narrative attacks, they can move markets, they can crush brands and reputation, they can even reposition people's view on your company from the inside out. And I just thought it worth saying that it's kind of you can use narrative attacks to do like a physical, digital, cyber threat almost simultaneously and automate it with generative AI.
Yeah. 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 Nation states and threat actors are now using the same tools, leveraging AI, and are behind a lot of these attacks. So that's why, again, it becomes more and more important for the security operations centers to be aware of it. So, Joe, next question teed it up perfectly for you. This one's around SOC applications. So, how are your teams integrating narrative intelligence into daily SOC operations, and what early benefits have you observed?
Yeah. First and foremost, we talk about narrative threat intelligence, and we're using it as like a very broad term. But what Blackbird AI is able to provide is not just, hey, here's some things we think you should be concerned about, right? There's grouping, there's organization, there's risk scoring, there's credibility scoring, there's all of this that goes in there to really say, hey, these are the things you should pay attention to. And this over here is the noise. And I think that's super important because when we're talking to our clients and our SOC teams are engaged daily, they're reviewing hundreds of incidents that are coming up, everything from a phishing email, a QR code that was sent, someone trying to do a password spray, or someone trying to get through the firewall, right? The threats that a SOC sees are so numerous. But when it starts to escalate, and how we initially bring in Blackbird is when there's that one event, right? It's one of those things where no one wants to look at this information. They kind of know it exists out there, And they might not be aware that, with Blackbird, we can track it, we can group it, and we can make it part of our daily activity. But usually it's that one event, that one thing that's going to say, uh-oh, stuff just got real. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this, so insert curse word if that works
Absolutely.
out better for you. But stuff got real very fast, and reach out and say, hey, someone just made a threat against this member of our C-suite, and we need to understand if it's real or not. We would like to know some more context, and that's usually the first event where we are going to now say, hey, we understand you've got a lot going on. You're asking to do more with less, and now you have this threat intelligence that you're trying to balance, and ransomware and all these other things we've already discussed. But when that event emerges, that's when we bring in Blackbird and say, hey, we know that you're panicked, you're scared, you're not even sure if this is your job or not, right? Someone brought it to you because you're the cybersecurity team. And if we live in a digital world, then therefore cybersecurity is security for everything. So you don't even know if this is your job yet, but it's a fellow member of the C-suite. If you're the CISO, it's your CEO, is coming to you and saying, hey, I really need help. Who do they reach out to? They reach out to us because we're the ones who are already, helping them stay out of trouble on a daily basis. Our teams of analysts are working to do that. So they're now saying, what do we do about this thing? And there's things that we as SRA can do as far as we can help them, maybe understand some stuff going on, but it is nowhere near the level of what Blackbird AI can provide. So we say, hey, client, we would love to bring in Blackbird for you just to have a conversation, explain what you're seeing, let Blackbird explain how they've seen this elsewhere, and let them propose how we can work together. And that is super helpful. I think first and foremost, it creates empathy with our clients. It's not just, oh, someone said some bad stuff about you and you're worried that someone's going to get hurt. Let us sell you something, right? That's not the process at all. It says, we say, oh, we understand that you're very stressed right now and you're trying to figure out next steps. We've had other clients come to us with those same concerns, and we've had good luck in our partner Blackbird because they're not coming in just to sell you stuff. At the end, you might say, oh, yes, we really, really want to incorporate that. We really want that. But that is not part of the meeting. It's, hey, tell us what you're seeing. We'll tell you what we've seen elsewhere. And maybe this can help you, right? It's coming from a place of helping versus, we're going to sell you all this stuff and discount code, and you get a free set of steak knives, right? It's not that. It's about meeting you in your time of need and stress. And what that results in, and that has happened for several of our clients, is a one-off report. Hey, here's the actual event incident. Here's what Blackbird AI and its team of analysts were able to find out about that. And that is a great starting point because it immediately shows value, understanding, and really flexes the capability of Blackbird saying, yeah, this was the threat. Turns out it was amplified because of a bot network. And, this person's kind of, not necessarily famous for causing problems or known for causing problems. So we're going to, say it's not so big of a risk. It's something to monitor, right? You're never going to say there's not a risk. Or you might say, hey, this is very real. And this person who made this threat is connected to a much larger group and has a following of like 50,000 people that are going to, at the very least, boycott your organization. That's not good. Worst case, make physical threats and might seek to carry out those physical threats. And that's when we go from that, hey, let's do a one-off report and see where we're at, to how do we start to monitor this and manage this for you, both as a client and then us as a service provider. How do we start to receive this information and track it and see the SOC, the SIM, as this fusion center of collecting this information? Because a lot of the time it's not going to be the CISO's responsibility to go fix some misinformation. They might want to engage in some activities to remove certain pieces of content from the web, but a lot of times they're going to want to assign that out to another group to support. And where that brings us then into is seeing our analysts and working alongside the SOC with our clients, really starting to understand this a little bit more and not seeing it as like this new burden. Oh my gosh, I've got to look at email, I've got to look at the endpoints, and now I have to look at this narrative threat intelligence thing. How do I do all of it? Because it's very focused and the information that they're getting is so organized and researched. I don't know what the right word is, but it's not noise. It's a, quick read, check in on something and say, all right, is there anything I need to action or I need to assign out? It's not, oh, I'm going to take 10 hours a day now to review this content every single day, right? It's a report that's refreshed, and you can drill in as much as you want. We were doing I don't know if you want to say like a demo a couple weeks ago, and the ability to dig into the information can become so interesting. The person we were meeting with said, I can spend all day in this. I know I shouldn't because I have 90 other things to be doing, but the amount of analysis that's provided and vetted and like just so easily digestible, and in a way that it's not just for that security team, right? It's not like a feed of just a whole bunch of numbers and letters and someone's got to analyze it. There's a lot of it that you can screenshot, copy, paste, and quickly send off to other teams. And it's in plain text makes sense and is actionable.
That's great. That's a great summary. And more and more people are coming to us trying to be proactive before a crisis hits. But if a crisis does hit or hits their competitor or hits their industry, even more reason why to try to get ahead of this as much as possible. So we'll talk a little bit more about the technology and that in a little bit. But before we go there, Joe, you mentioned Fusion Center. So this is going to be a question to both of you. I'll first start with Wasim. It's about cross-functional collaboration, right? If the security team CISO owns this because this is a threat to the company, attack on the company, we also see that there are a lot of connective tissue throughout the organization that needs to be involved in this process, right? And collaboration with other departments, with other leaders when narrative attacks happen. So Wasim, give us your view of the Fusion Center and how the CISO can be a leader and work with other teams to help protect the company.
Yeah, it's changed a lot in the last couple of years, and even more since we started. Um, I'm I'm kind of reminded of this panel I did a while back, and one of the people on the panels for like I think Aspen Institute panel with Chris Krebs. He was one of the speakers, and we were talking about narrative intelligence. It's funny because he had like one slide, I think, during the entire thing, and it was the Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme. And this might be maybe people don't know here, but it was him basically talking about how it's really hard to get ownership of this problem around, when he was talking about a disinformation, things of that nature. And we're thinking about it from the perspective of narrative attacks, but it's like, who's on first with this thing, right? So it's pretty funny. And that kind of thing still happens a bit today, but it's really starting to change quite dramatically. So you know, what's happening now is that narrative intelligence, let's say as a discipline, is something people are actually starting to come to us asking for, which is pretty remarkable if we rewind back just 5 years. And they're even thinking about, hey, how do we avoid the next narrative attack? And Dan knows this. It was only like 2 years ago where the first company inbounded us looking for narrative attack protection. I'm like, hey, man, we just came up with that term to actually like put a top line descriptor on this new tradecraft, and now people are coming to us actually asking for it. And so that was the challenge first: is get CISOs and threat intel teams and others to actually understand what it is and how they can work together in this fusion center concept. Um, but I think really as it evolves, the SOC could be the center of gravity for this kind of defense within large organizations. It's starting to happen with a few very large companies that we work with who are very bleeding edge, but it's going to be the norm in 2 years. Because as a company, someone has to establish base reality on the kind of attacks that are actually coming in so you know how to react and attach playbooks to it. So historically, narratives, just the word narratives conjures up in security teams, hey, that's a comms thing or a legal thing or a PR thing, but not any longer. 40+% of our inbounds are from security teams, right? And narrative attacks, they move at such high speed, and the actors behind it, well, they're the same people. They're the same nation states, the same cyber criminals that are conducting traditional cyber attacks. And so the only teams that are really the front line of that within large organizations are the cybersecurity teams. They're going to be the ones that people are pointing at when shit hits the fan. That's just what's going to happen. They have to get ready for the fact that that's going to be their responsibility. And it's going to be the purview of the threat intelligence teams. And the SOC already has the processes, the telemetry, and the people that have the response discipline to handle a narrative attack as long as they can see it coming, right? And certainly there's going to be a component of it where you still need to bring in the strategic communicators because you have to frame how you handled the breach. You have to your board, to your shareholders. The SEC demands it, right? You got 4 days, so you got to have that narrative ready and tell them what really happened as related to what they're seeing maybe on social media or the news. More and more, we see the CISO and the SOC teams take the lead on protecting the executive team, for example, from executive physical threat. And we can also provide the narrative angle when an organization gets those harmful narratives coming in based on something that happened out there in the real world, right? And of course, I think the people on the front lines are considering a narrative attack an attack on the company similar to phishing or DDoS attacks, and it's just going to trend more in that direction. And so, how do you integrate narrative intelligence into the same processes the SOC is already looking at to give them the signal to prioritize the most harmful narratives and pair it with the other problems that they're already looking at? That's really the capabilities that I think that's the better together story, really, is putting those two things together for the people who need them. And then from there, whether it's the SOC or whether you're kind of filtering that information to the internal or external comms teams, you have to quickly alert the entire organization to educate them in an easy way to understand what narratives are, who's behind it, which networks are it spreading across, is it bot driven or not, and what organizations and hyper agenda groups are scaling it further. So yeah, a lot of companies are referring to this as a fusion team because they're fusing signals intelligence together to be more prepared when any kind of event or incident occurs. You can use it to understand how the information environment is turning against you. But you can also use it as post-incident response when you actually suffer a real cyber breach. And so there's a lot of different applications and use cases, but those are two of the really popular ones, I would say, are the top of mind ones, things that are keeping people up at night that we see executives and CISOs starting to come to us for. 3 years ago, no one thought this was an issue they needed to worry about as a security team. But now, I mean, man, we just had there was a critical infrastructure company, massive one, that were strapped for budget, like significantly strapped for budget. They don't even log into our system every day, but they said we can't live without this thing. So we're definitely going to keep using it, keep going. And to me, that's like a bigger must-have signal than people who are just like buying a whole bunch of products and testing them out, right? Like these teams were under the gun and they were like, we got to have it. And that to me speaks volumes on how the tides are shifting on needing narrative intelligence within the threat intelligence teams.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, great response. And yeah, more and more the teams are coming together. So, Joe, give us your view of this cross-functional collaboration and fusion centers. Give us a little more detail.
What Wasim said is really important. The amount of requests to Blackbird that are coming from that security operations team, from that cybersecurity team, from the CISO. I think if we, polled random CISOs, a lot of them would be unwilling to say that this is something that would land up on their desk and this would be something that their team would, have to own or at the very least ingest because they're not fusion centers. It's not their key function. They don't do physical protection. They would have a whole litany of why this isn't their thing. And I want to agree with them and say, you're already doing too much. This isn't your thing. But the fact is, when problems arise, when there's an event, when there's an issue, when there's a threat, it's the cybersecurity team that's reaching out to Blackbird, right? So as much as everyone wants to deny and say like, oh, it's not really our thing, we're overworked, or, no one's flapping their hands around and saying, oh, yes, I want to ingest more threats because my team isn't busy enough and we were looking to expand our charter, right? That might have been a point at early on, but it's endpoint, it's identity, it's all of these things that they're already monitoring, and to now say, hey, we're going to look at this other source of threat intelligence, right? They're already ingesting a lot of other pieces of threat intelligence. So I understand the hesitancy of someone who is yet to be impacted or yet to be aware that they've been impacted. But I think what we see time and time again is once an organization is impacted, it is that cybersecurity team that's making that phone call to SRA, to Blackbird saying, hey, here's where we're at. Please help us out. And I think if we now go under that premise of, yes, when something happens, there's that triggering moment that says, "Ooh, I need to get serious now about narrative threat intelligence." The CISO, the SOC team, the whole cybersecurity team might be thinking, "Oh my goodness, now I have to hire up 30, 40 people in order to understand this, right? I've got to get my headcount ask in because I need a huge team." And no one's going to get funded for their huge team, and that kind of self collapses the whole idea. But I think when we look at these types of alerts that are coming in, these incidents, these evolving narratives that you were tracking, most of the time the cybersecurity team is the best to receive that signal. They're the closest to a fusion center, but they're gonna, put this in their ticketing system and assign it to a different person or a different team, and they're just acting as the host, and they're gonna make sure that it gets looked at. And sometimes, probably 10% of the time, there's gonna be um, actionable intelligence for the cybersecurity team in a more traditional sense. Hey, it looks like this group is going to do a DDoS attack on us, and therefore we should be aware. What are their TTPs? What are the IOCs we're looking for? Let's make sure, let's do some advanced hunting now. Let's do some proactive hunting within our environment to see if any of that already exists, and let's bolster our defenses, right? And that itself, that 10% of the time, can be hugely impactful, not just for helping the cybersecurity team, but the overall business, right? That might prevent a ransomware attack that takes out a hospital. So I think if we're talking to our cybersecurity leaders out there, this is going to end up on your desk sooner than later. So better to have a plan, better to engage early and understand that it's not more work. In fact, you're probably decreasing the amount of work because that 10% of the time that's going to be actionable by your team versus what you might ask others to do is going to pay for itself as far as time and effort down the road. So
Yeah.
to the idea of burying your head in the sim and saying not my job, get it? Burying your head in the sim like sand. Okay, that was my one joke of the whole call. But it doesn't make the threats disappear, and it's a lot easier to hit a baseball when you know it's being thrown. So I think our cyber security folks are more and more aware of it, and the idea that they are the closest to a fusion center is just the reality. And as a result, this becomes something that they need to be aware of.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would just add, we hear more and more that a lot of these teams are trying to do this manually. It takes a lot of time. They're inefficient. They're making wrong decisions because they don't have the real data. So to have narrative intelligence automates all that, right? Leveraging AI, and it will make their job simpler and easier. So with that said, question coming up for Wasim here around actionable narrative intelligence. So once SOCs and these fusion team members have access to narrative intelligence, what steps can they take to reduce risk now that they have full information? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I can keep this one quick because if they're listening, I know they're going to just want a crisp answer for this one. So, look, once you have narrative visibility, you got to operationalize it. How do you turn awareness into action? So, we think of this through four stages. First thing, counter or clarify. You have to issue contextual, factual narratives to reclaim what is real in public channels as quickly as possible. And that's through your strategic comms team or your internal comms team to your board, to your shareholders, to your CEO, right? Second, harden posture. So, in the case of narratives, we want to look at the narrative patterns. We want to indicate, who's targeting who. We want to increase vigilance across cyber and physical surfaces. You call your CSO. You escalate maybe from green to red fast based on narrative signal. So that's your hardening of posture. Third, you got to prioritize the risk. So we're always using artificial intelligence now in cyber and in our products to distinguish between, say, human-driven and bot-driven narratives. So that's just one example of how do you prioritize risk based on these signals, and then their efforts will align with threat level. And finally, the fourth, you have to be able to measure before you can mitigate. So you got to measure the outcomes. So track whether those narratives also decline or mutate into something even more high risk after that response. So those are kind of the four: counter or clarify, harden your posture, prioritize risk, measure the outcomes. And what's powerful here is narrative intelligence is, in fact, about noise reduction in a new attack surface that is much noisier than traditional cyber. So SOC analysts get a ranked risk scored feed of the narratives that matter most from the perspective of risk so they can make faster and better informed decisions.
That's great. All right, perfect summary. Excellent. All right, so Joe, let's go talk about the partnership here and the strategic value of SRA and Blackbird coming together. Give us your view on that and how it's helping customers around organizational resilience.
Yeah, so Security Risk Advisors, trusted cybersecurity partner for hundreds of our clients and growing. And we want to be the ones that they call first when things are awry, when there's a new threat emerging and they want to understand it, they come to us. And we know that we're doing our job when we're the first ones that they call. Because it means that they trust us to protect them and to secure them. So beginning in like 2024, and it's maybe it existed before then, but I think it got way more noisy in the media. And as a result, we saw, these online threats becoming physical threats. And, you can just go out and search for news stories around executive protection, executive threats, and you really see a crescendoing impact where it's entering more of our dialogue. And as a result, our clients started saying, "Ooh, we've sort of had these in the past. We haven't really done much with them because we thought that they were, in this box of the digital world, trolls being trolls, and the idea that it could escape that box." Where that online threat could become a physical one, really started to raise questions from our clients, and we were searching for, well, where do we point them to, right? We're not going to sell them private militaries that are going to surround their executives to keep them safe. I think there's financial blockers for that. There's definitely PR blockers of why your executive has like a whole bunch of bodyguards around them. I think economically it's really hard. So we looked at where are the spaces that we can add value to our clients in this fight. How can we assist them? How can we give them some tools? And SRA has very few partnerships, very few. And as the director of strategic alliances, right, alliances, partnerships, I'm very proud of that. You would assume, as the person leading partnerships, the more the better. The reality is that the less, the more important these are, that they're true alliances. We don't just partner with anybody because we want to, resell something or, we think it's going to make us a lot of money. I would love to not have to do any of this stuff. This isn't exciting. It's not fun, but these risks are very real, and we all have a shared responsibility. Security being a team sport, we all have this shared responsibility of how can we protect our clients. So we partner when 1 + 1 = 3, and only when it benefits our clients. We're never going to do anything that's purely just for security risk advisors for SRA. It has to be based on client demand, what the clients are asking for. So it's the demand and then the capability. Can we serve them? Can we help them in this fight? If we can't, we're not going to lie and fake it. Like, we have to be very clear in cybersecurity what you can do and what you can't do, and that is super important. And go to any large conference expo floor and you'll see like everyone promising the moon. We're very clear on what we can and what we can't do. But that's why when we look at our partnerships and our limited set of partnerships, Blackbird.AI is super important in that, because it is meeting an emerging client need that we're not fully meeting ourselves. And I don't think the industry as a whole is fully met, where I see, Blackbird really leading there and inventing the solution to this emerging problem faster than anyone else. So that's why we partner with Blackbird.AI. And I think a lot of our clients are going to be coming to us more and more as these narrative threats continue to emerge. I don't think this problem's going away, unfortunately. And as we've already talked about, the SOC is the default fusion center.
That's great. All right, perfect. All right, final question, and I always like to end these with the way forward, right? So this will be for both of you, and Joe, I'll go for you first. But we talked about fitting narrative intelligence into the broader threat intelligence and SOC maturity models as we go into 2026 with more types of attacks and things like that. In just a couple of sentences, what would you want to share as a summary here or as a recommendation? And then after that, I'll pass it over to Wasim to answer the same question.
Sure, the world's not becoming any safer. Our CISOs tell us this. Our analysts at SRA are seeing this. Attacker tactics are evolving, but also our ability to see that, to ingest that, to analyze that is expanding too, and that's a great sign. But it means that we need to keep up and we need to invest there. So AI is making it easier for SOC teams to ingest this signal without the noise, right? Actionable insights, and Blackbird.AI makes that possible. And then I see narrative threat intelligence as something CISOs need to be investing in today versus waiting for, that threat to be made online where there's a scramble and a panic. Let's avoid the panic. Let's come up with the plan today. And I hope this conversation starts to help our audience start to map that into what their roadmap looks like.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, Wasim, the way forward for you.
It's just such a critical need right now for security teams. And I would just reiterate, a couple of years ago, this space was considered highly experimental or somebody else's problem. Um, you know, I actually found this on my phone. So this whole Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme, this is the one we're talking about. You don't want to be caught in that scenario once a narrative attack actually hits between comms, your CSO, and your CISO. And those are the three people that need to be proactive about this problem, right? So you need a critical feed for narrative attacks in every mature SOC's threat stack. And I would say, you know, Gartner says $30 billion in spend by 2028 from cyber and from comms and marketing, combined 10% of their spend is going to go towards it. So 30 billion in spend. That's not like perceived market damage or something. Spend, right? And I think just based on the trend we're seeing internally, which is just a little more on the front line, as early as 2027, narrative intelligence is going to sit right alongside traditional threat telemetry across all SOCs, all threat intelligence teams. And right now, the demand is already increasing for us from those teams. Now, because perception, it's just become an attack surface and one that's like a bit fuzzier than what most cyber teams are looking at. But perception is the first area of compromise. And the prolonged impact comes from narrative in almost every major issue that organizations are starting to face. So the organizations that recognize that right now are just going to be ahead of the curve, ahead of the threat curve. And they'll have the context and the clarity to act before perception manipulation attacks turn into harmful impact, harming their stock price, harming their team, safety of execs. We talked about all of these. And I think our partnership with SRA is about just operationalizing that need that we see coming, like coming fast for these cyber teams. And so what are we doing together? I mean, we're creating awareness, first of all, that this is an issue and that there's actually technology and partners that can actually solve that issue. For us as a tech startup, distribution is everything. So having distribution with SRA is fantastic. We get to the operators that have the mission of protecting the perimeter, regardless of if they're new attack surfaces or traditional ones. And we want to make people get a front line on understanding narrative intelligence is part of the SOC fabric. And that's just going to happen whether they wanted to or not over time. So they might as well be ahead of that curve. And I just think together we can be, the ones that make that happen, helping enterprises defend not just their infrastructure, but their integrity, trust from their teams, and frankly, the company at large. And we're really excited about having the opportunity to make that happen with SRA. And it's great to partner with you, Joe. And I got to say, congrats to you and Ray on the engagement as well.
Thank you.
So, yeah, really looking forward to what we're going to do in the coming weeks, months, and years.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Wasim. I love how this partnership started on an airplane ride to Black Hat.
It ended up on a rocket.
Yeah. It's a small community and it's about trust and relationships and providing value to customers. And this is certainly a great partnership that does that. So thank you for the fantastic discussion today. You both provided the team and the group here with a lot to think about regarding how narrative intelligence fits into the Security Operations Center and the importance of this going forward. So thank you for sharing your viewpoints here. And I'd like to thank everyone who participated and joined the webinar today. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us. and to hopefully get some good value out of it. We hope this session helped you understand how perception-driven threats like narrative attacks are becoming integral part of modern attack surface. So that's why integrating into the SOC is really, really important discussion today. So again, thank you again, Joe. Thank you, Wasim. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.